Ready. Okay. Got it. Okay. So I just approved it.
Okay, that was on the recording.
Yes.
Uh, well, that means this is very authentic.
Yes, it is.
All right. So, welcome to the podcast, The American Diversity Report, where we interview movers and shakers and creative change makers. I'm Deborah Levine, editor and your host. And with me today is an artist named Richard Humann. Do I have that correct?
Yes, human or human, whatever, we
It's a
say it's
one.
human and maybe in German it's Humann, but
Okay.
I'm in Brooklyn. Yeah.
And Richard is Brooklyn based, you say,
Yes.
neo-conceptual artist with innumerable international gallery and museum exhibitions, including the Chemi Art Museum, the Tampere Art Museum, and many others. So he was born and raised in the lower Hudson Valley region of New York State, and he divides his time between Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and Woodstock. I love that. New
Yes.
York.
Exactly. And I divide not quite equally, mostly Brooklyn, but it's creeping up to be a lot more Woodstock as well now. Right now, it's about 4 days Brooklyn, 3 days in Woodstock is what I do.
Were you at Woodstock during the Woodstock Festival back in the day?
No, I would have been very, very small at that time. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about when you were very small and how you decided what motivated you to become an artist.
Well, I always tell this story, and it's a true story, of course. When I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, my grandfather, my mother's father, he came back from the war. He was in the Navy in World War II. And he would sit with me when I was a child, and he taught me to draw like little simple designs of like boats on the water and seagulls using W's that create like or V's that and spread out to create the seagulls flying over. And one day I was on my own, maybe 3 or 4, and I drew Noah's Ark in Magic, and my grandfather was not in the room at the time, walked in and said, he grabbed it and he said, "This is incredible. You are going to be a famous artist one day." And he put it up on the wall, and I believed him, but I always had this part of me as an artist. And when I was 7 years old, my parents brought me to private painting classes with a local artist named George White, and I just began from that point on. I grew up in a small town called Stony Point, New York, which is it's by Bear Mountain, north of New York City, and so there wasn't a lot of art around us. And George White was a painter in the nearby town, and there were some people who we went to him of all different ages to learn. And then later, I went to art college after high school, and I moved to New York about 3 years after college. I came to Brooklyn in 1985, actually, when it was a little bit dangerous, and you had to have that calling, right? I had that calling to be here, and New York at that time was this, arguably the center of the art world, which it still is, arguably, in my opinion. And I've been here ever since, so far.
So far.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, it is, New York is amazing in terms of art. When we moved back to New York after living in Bermuda, every weekend my father would take us to galleries and museums and musicals, and it was just endless
I
passion.
was just I just came back from a month-long art residency program in Europe. I was in Finland. I just got back last Sunday, and I, not that I do it all the time, but about once a year, once every 2 years, I go away for a month. Last summer, I was at Recreate in Piemonte, Italy. I spent a month in Piemonte at a residency program. But I was explaining to some of the artists. I was just in Oulu, Finland, which is on the Gulf of Bothnia, the Baltic Sea, and some of them hadn't been to New York. Some of the people, and I was explaining like in their city, which is a beautiful, wonderful city, but there are a few art galleries and one museum. Whereas in New York, just in a 6 block range in Chelsea between like 18th Street and 27th or something, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of galleries, and the MoMA and the Whitney and everything, everything in between is here. And there's no place quite like it on earth. And I've traveled. I have an extensive travel history with my work to many, many different cities. I lived in Korea, in Seoul, Korea, Venice, Italy. I did a residency program there for months on end, and I've been there 20 times because of the art world, and all over from Rome to Berlin. And Berlin's really hot, but nothing is New York. Nothing's New York. It just isn't.
It just is.
Yeah, true.
That's right. They wrote that song about it.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes, it is, and I miss it. I miss it. It's
And
yeah.
where are you located right now?
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I came south, and I still have relatives in New York,
Right.
and it's wonderful to hear from them and see what they're doing. It's a pleasure.
Never
My,
a
my
dull.
hmm?
It's never a dull moment here.
No, no, it isn't, and neither are the people who live there.
I so this is maybe not right for this podcast, but I was explaining to somebody the other day, in the town I came from, if I don't drink and I'm a vegetarian, I don't even drink coffee. I'm completely, I haven't had a cup of coffee in 28 years or smoked a cigarette, vegetarian for 25 years. But, in the days when I was growing up, you'd go to a local bar and there'd be a bunch of people drinking, kind of like a Bukowski situation there, right? Like a Charles Bukowski, people are drinking. You come to New York, you go to a bar, and there's people drinking, but this guy's the head of jazz in Lincoln Center, and this guy's in a famous band, and that like everybody's is always active and doing, and there's something everywhere you go. And funny enough, Woodstock. I bought a house in Woodstock 28 years ago in Woodstock,
Oh,
New York. And that's separate from where the concert is. The concert was held in Bethel Woods, about 2 hours west of the town of Woodstock. But
okay.
Woodstock is an artist community for 100 years and became famous when Bob Dylan came up there, and then the band, Levon Helm and the band, and there's just so many musicians up there. But over the past 10 years, there's been this incredible renaissance of the Hudson Valley, and so many of the New York artists are also moving north up the Hudson Valley to Hudson, New York, and Woodstock, and Rhinebeck, and I can't think of the name of the town right now, but we're to the Art Center at Beacon, New York. So there's like this really amazing growth of art that's happening north of, and it's plugged in. It used to be very separate, and now it's as one. It's one entity almost that's happening. Quite amazing.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So the world of art is changing, uh,
Yes.
and not just geographically, but the way people are engaging in it. Tell us a little bit about the changes you've seen, whether it's in Brooklyn or more in the Hudson Valley. What are we experiencing? What should people know?
Well, so first off, it is a geographical difference, in my opinion. When I moved here in 1985, you can rent a loft, and I'm speaking from my loft now, and that I rent. It's an old firehouse, and I've been here for 38 years living here. And but back in the day, you could have an affordable apartment or loft, a studio, and there was this really tight knit art community that was here. Number one, people who came to New York, you had to really survive it, right? You had to survive on every level, and which meant that you were really driven to be here. There was like this calling, and now the one thing I do see on a geographical level is that the whole entire world now is open to an artist. You don't have to live in Brooklyn or Manhattan or the Bronx or Queens like you had to when I moved here. You can live in Amsterdam, or you could live in Oulu or Helsinki or Berlin, of course, or Seoul. The art world now is spread out, but it's actually much smaller than it used to be in terms of geography. Right, it's a small world, and then in terms of art, I've always had art dealers that represented my work, but there are artists that do not have art dealers that either represent themselves or show online. That's not my thing. I've just always had an art dealer for as long as I can remember, and still do. And but it's a whole different game nowadays in terms of what you can and can't do. It's a big possibility out there. It's just how you navigate what is right for you, I think, is what it is.
Yeah, the world
Yeah.
has changed, especially with technology and networks on the internet, and
Yeah.
it's a very interesting challenge, isn't it?
It's a challenge for sure. And in some ways better, and in some ways maybe not better. I mean, I remember the days of going around when I first got out of college, and you'd bring your work around in slides in those days, and you could not even get past the gatekeeper at a gallery. Like nobody would ever talk to you, right? So, which meant that you'd be working in your studio, and nobody would ever see that if you didn't have the ability to exhibit it at a gallery. Now you can show your work on the internet, and I'm not saying it's better or worse. All I'm saying is that at least people will be able to see it. Again, I don't do that, but maybe I'm stuck old school. I've just found that having an art dealer allows me to create my work without having to then market myself that way. So for me, marketing is almost a full-time job, right? And so
It
my
is.
job is to my job's to make art personally.
Go you. Well, I've written 18 books. I've never had an agent.
Right.
I'm supposed to be marketing, but that's, yeah, it's a whole different career. It's a skill set that's wonderful, but it's a different career.
Absolutely, I agree. And like my art dealer is from Austria, been in New York for many, 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 many years, but they know people. Like I'm actually meeting her this evening, dropping off work because I'm doing a show in Buenos Aires. I just got back from Europe on Sunday, and now I'm packaging work to ship to Buenos Aires. That is, maybe I could do that on my own, but boy, it would be a lot more work than just to get a phone call and say, you're in a show, come by and drop the work off. Like it's a whole different situation.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And given that you are displaying your work internationally, at all kinds of places, I think that kind of help is very necessary, right?
Yes, it absolutely is. I get between art dealer and people that you meet along the way and different curators help you to again navigate or guide. They're Sherpas for your career. My
Yeah.
first art dealer, I was showing in small galleries in Brooklyn for 10 years when I came here, which was wonderful and exciting. And, it was really amazing because you had this ability to do anything you wanted to do at all. But when I got picked up by an art dealer who was well known and represented many well known artists, and some of them giants, but that was 1998, and I went from showing in a small Brooklyn space to a Manhattan gallery, getting
Ah,
an Art America or the New York Times or the reviews and getting collectors and things that you're just not really. It's not easy to gather that on your own. It just isn't.
no, it certainly isn't.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how you made that transition, from a sort of local Brooklyn artist to worldwide.
Well,
You,
it wasn't worldwide at first. It took a long time, but yeah, it was done in a single phone call. Funny enough, I mean, it was literally done as anything else. Change happens sometimes instantly, right? You
yes,
you work your whole life, and change happens in 5 minutes. Just and it was a 5 minute thing, and just it changed the course of my life at that point. Yes,
my goodness.
yeah.
How old were you?
I was in my 30s at that time. Yeah, I came to New York. It was a difficult journey from a small town.
Sure.
It takes, to escape the gravitational pull of the small town. You have to fight hard to get out of that. And when I finally did, you land in New York, and then you have to really find out how to work your way through here. And then I met a bunch of people, and like I said, I was showing in small galleries. And one day, this art dealer who I had been wooing for a long time, going to the openings, made a
Yes.
phone call to my studio and said, "I heard about your work. If you can be here in 30 minutes, I'll look at it." And I was flying to Toronto that day for a small show, my first international show. And I ran over into Soho back in those days from Brooklyn, showed the work. And just as I was there showing my work, the artist who had a solo show coming up in like 6 weeks called and said he had to cancel. His work wasn't ready. And that art dealer turned to me and said, "Do you want the show?" And I said, "Yes." And then I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to do it. Went to Toronto, came back 3 days later, and began working, and then put the show together. So literally, it was like an instant life change. From
Oh,
there, I ended up showing in Houston, Texas, and California, and then went on to the Venice Biennale in 2003. So I did my first museum show, solo museum show in 2003. That same year, of my first solo museum show, I did another solo gallery show here in New York and the Venice Biennale in the same year. It's like a very, very busy, changing thing. Yeah.
yeah, my goodness, yes. Well, you'll be amused to know that I started out as a Gal Friday in the New York Manhattan's Garment District.
Okay.
Yeah, making coffee.
Okay.
And
I
I
get
was
it.
terrible at it.
Good for you. It's good.
But one perseveres, do they not?
It's true. And we've all made coffee, let's be honest, right? And I joke about this because, the life of an artist is not an easy life. It just isn't. And, one of the things I joke about, when I bought the house in Woodstock in 1995, I was able to purchase the house essentially in cash from a very, very good 2 years, right? And then what happens is, back then that was 1995. You couldn't touch it now. It was a different world financially.
Sure.
But but and then the following year, I joke, but it's really based in truth. I couldn't afford gas to get to the house. So in other words, like, so one year you buy it, and then the next year you can't put gas in your car to get there. And that's like the life of an artist. It just is.
Pretty much.
And so, I mean, that was also 28 years ago. I've done better since. I can afford gas now, mostly.
Oh,
And
good.
then, but yeah, so you have to be dedicated. It's a calling. It's something that it's cliche to say, but it shows me I didn't choose this. I mean, it'd be crazy to choose this, right?
I know the feeling, believe me.
Exactly.
So what advice would you have for a young person who's considering becoming an artist?
If I could, again, I'm going to be very cliche to you, right? Which
Okay?
is, only you can beat yourself. Nobody else can beat you. No, there's nobody that can beat you. If you believe in what you do and you have this need, this desire to do it, there's nothing anybody could say to you that can stop you from doing that. And you are going to face so much opposition along the way, whether it's indifference, whether it's outright people telling you that your work is not good, but only you can beat yourself. Only you can stop what you're doing. And there's this moment in time which I call piercing the veil. And you'll see, because it's never breaking down the brick wall like the Kool-Aid guy, that smashes through the wall. It's piercing the veil. And you don't even realize sometimes that you've pierced it, that you've gone to the next level. Because sometimes it's so soft of a pierce that it just happens and you realize, wow, wait, I'm here. And that's why you can never give up. You just never, ever, ever give up.
Never give up.
Yeah.
So, what's your life going to look like in the next 5, 10 years as you look forward?
It's a good question. I don't know, right? I'm getting older. The world is changing, but I do have exhibitions lined up, and so the idea is to. I'm at that twofold stage right now. I'm creating new work, but I'm also taking stock in what I've done and putting together like the catalog raison, right? The catalog of my life, and I've reached that stage in my life where I'm thinking, good or bad, I'm beginning to have everything into one place to try to figure out. I'm looking backwards and I'm looking forward simultaneously, is what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what I'm doing right now.
absolutely. Yes, I know the feeling.
Yeah, exactly. It happens. Someday you wake up and you're like, okay, now it's time. And it's time for me to do that now.
Go you, go you.
Yeah. Thank
Oh, this is wonderful. I'm inspired. I'm going to be looking over my catalog and thinking backwards and thinking forwards.
you. Right.
Because as much as it's pleasant to look back on all your successes and sometimes the goofy things that have happened over
Sure.
time, uh,
Yeah.
the future is still out there. And someone like you has something to offer people that they need in these difficult times.
Well, thank you. And that's interesting to say it that way. For me, and I'm sure like yourself, you kind of just do this naturally. And then if people can get something from that, that is that much the better. And because I've also been asked, like, how do you define success like that? And I've had work in collections. I've made a lot of money from work, and there's these things that you would think like, well, that's how I define my success, but it's not like that at all. Well, one of the definitions is, well, what did I create today? Like, am I happy with my own stuff? Because if I'm not, then none of that means anything, right? And then the other thing is, I remember once years ago, I've done lectures at universities. I don't teach. I'm not a teacher. I'm a good lecturer. It would be more like a grandparent that gets to be with the kids and go home at the end of the night. That's what a lecturer is like, right? So they
Yes.
love the kids and then they get to go home, right? So, but I remember once I was in my studio and somebody called and said that, oh, there's this MFA program right now and they're lecturing about my work, me. That meant more to me than any sale I've ever had in my life, any review. There's just something there that defined it as this like really important moment in my life. And so you define success differently each way.
Yeah.
It's not what you think it is.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a legacy moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels that way, right? It feels like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Indelible mark in who you are as a person.
Yes, exactly. Hmm. I remember my little girl when she was just very tiny, come running into me. I was writing at the desk, and she says, "Mom, did you know we all die and our molecules disappear into the sky?" And I said, "Yes, dear, I am aware of that." She
Right.
says, "Well, I don't want that." And so I said, "Well, most people don't, but
Right.
that's why they focus on things that may carry on beyond their life to
Exactly.
influence, to inspire, to change
Exactly.
for better."
I agree. And that is like true like living forever, right? I mean that it truly is. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And that's at the point where I'm at where I want to look back. I want to look back at my successes, but I also want to look back at my failures because honestly, Deborah, I learn more from my failures than I've ever learned from a success ever in my life.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. I
In both
understand.
life and in art at the same, both,
Yeah,
honestly. You have to
yeah.
embrace those failures. You really have to embrace them.
Oh, I write about them all the time, and I make people laugh and cry at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. I look back at my major failures as an artist. In life, you look back at your major failures in life, okay? And usually 3 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep. But when I look back at my major failures as an artist, I've learned so much from that on how to correct it for the next time. And then when you start falling into that trap next time. Those like things that draw you in to make that same mistake as an artist, whether it's aesthetically, creatively, conceptually. I could say, wait a second, I remember this from 2001 when I really ruined something. Let me step away from that and think differently this time. Maybe a
Yeah.
new success or a new failure, but it won't be the same failure, at least.
Well, you have absorbed it all in your brain, right?
Yes,
And it made the connections and use them when they're needed and
exactly.
make more.
Right, exactly, exactly, exactly.
Oh, is there anything else you would like to add that we haven't talked about today?
Well, I mean, I guess you could look at my work, at my website. It's www.richardhuman.com. And that's also becoming a kind of a legacy thing because that's what I just worked on in Europe when I was there. I came off a really long year of working and producing. So when I did this month-long residency, I said, let me try to think about my website again, right? Because you want to put that out there. So richardhuman.com, you could check out if you like.
I
And
certainly.
and I'm not sure. Is there any question that you might have that we haven't touched upon yet?
The only thing I can think of is, do you have any plans to come to Tennessee?
So my wife she's in a band called American Nomads, and you could look at them too. That's americannomadsband.com. And I'm
Yes.
involved in that, in the music end of that too. And I mean, Nashville's not that far from you, I'm
There
sure.
you go. No, it
And
isn't.
she's performed in Nashville before, and it's such an important music city in America, right? It's like historically and contemporarily, an important scene. So the answer is yes, absolutely.
Well, you let me know when y'all are coming down here.
I'll definitely do that. I'll do that.
That would be just wonderful.
Yeah, I would like that very much. Yes, and I've been there before, and it's a great. I mean, from from a music point of view, Nashville is it's just like Woodstock where I am. There's so much of this historical part of Woodstock, right? And so Nashville is even bigger than that. It just is. I mean, there's such a history there, and
Right.
it's a magical place. It really is. So
Magical.
yeah.
Yes,
So
indeed.
I look forward to it, to coming down,
All right.
and we'll go to Dollywood maybe. No, I'm kidding.
Ooh.
I'm joking.
You
I
know
know.
that we tried to get Dolly to let us make a statue of her to put in front of the Capitol in Nashville.
Right.
He told us, "Don't be ridiculous. You got to wait till I die."
On a serious note, I know a producer of Dolly's producer, right? And
Oh,
everybody who's ever met her has nothing but great things to say about her as a performer and as a person. I was joking about the Dollywood. Like I'm like not the guy that rides on amusement rides. Like I've been last summer, right before the pandemic, so that I lost 2 years mentally. But we got arrested in Korea. I was putting an art piece between
oh,
North and South Korea in the control zone, which is by the DMZ. I mean, literally right on the electrified fence. So I've been arrested there. I've been in Islamabad, like in the mountains of the Himalayas, and if something happens in those places, I'm like, okay, I lived a good life. I'm gonna die here. Oh, what I don't want to do is die in like on an amusement ride.
fair enough. Fair enough. All right.
Are you?
Well, well,
Can you still see me?
yes, I can still
Okay,
see
good.
you.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
So let us both hope that our legacy is as good as Dolly's, and
Yes.
that people say the nicest things about us both. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you. Take care.